bringing up someone who will talk to you about what it's like to start a company already having a full-time job. But maybe you're not going to start it right after graduation. Maybe you're going to start it, when you have a full-time job, when you work somewhere. Arjun is one of those people. So, thank you.
Thanks. Wow. These are such great talks. Actually, it's hard to follow because I just think back to my undergrad days. So I'm a assistant professor of ophthalmology here at UVA, and so yes, I do have a full-time job. So I see patients in 2 clinics here at UVA and do surgery as well on the eye. But I've learned a huge amount from everybody here in the room, and then I just wanted to share some of that it is possible to actually move the needle forward even as a faculty member, and kind of how I did it. That said, I just wanted to come. I couldn't resist it. So Payam's talk was so amazing. What I love that slide. Say no to medical school. That's, as an ophthalmologist, that's interesting to hear. But that said, it is really true. It is not for everyone, and that's one thing. I think it's very, very common for people to sort of start on a path that starts sometimes at birth. And then sort of, why did I get here, and what am I really sort of going to get out of this, and is this really right for me? And I think it's important. I think what a hero or heroine that person was who talked to you that day and to tell you that, maybe this isn't right for you. And I think that's the same for a lot of us. But I want to say that, so my own journey, I wanted to show you guys a lot of really cool technology and eye photos. I'm only going to show you one. Mostly because Alex wanted me to really focus on just sort of the story aspect today. So this is kind of things they didn't teach me in medical school. But I really briefly wanted to kind of talk about what it is that I did. So essentially I came up with a diagnostic system to turn our patient exams and charting, and this is from an actual patient chart, really, for real. This is what gets charted as to what's happening in somebody's eye in 2018, from this to this. So this is actually what is in the eye, and that's what I see on a daily basis when I see patients. And I came up with a system to kind of capture that wealth of diagnostic data in real time as doctors see patients. And I wanted to sort of mostly focus on the story of my journey of how I actually did that. And as to where we are today, I ended up stripping out. I talked to my wife beforehand, and Alex said 10 minutes. So I ended up stripping out all the story of the actual platform that we developed. But I did want to say that at this stage we actually built this. So I formed a team, sort of found that through the UVA Eye Lab as well, and then iterated our prototype diagnostic system now multiple times, as well as an associated software platform. Filed our initial IP, and we're actually now gearing up to beta test our diagnostic system in actual doctors' offices in multiple practices in coming months. So kind of I wanted to focus on, so how did that actually happen? So I think the most important thing, or one of the most fundamental things, is what I call a beginner's mindset. And the kernel of the initial idea for my entire diagnostic system came when I first had to actually learn how to examine the human eye, and that was as a medical student. So as a third-year medical student, spending a little bit of time in some ophthalmologist's office in University of Tennessee, which is where I grew up in Memphis. And then I noticed that we're using 100-year-old technology to examine the human eye and make all our diagnoses, talking about what the doctor does. And that seemed a little strange to me. But I sort of put that aside, and then I fast forward a couple of years to a first-year resident, actually my first week of training in Philadelphia. And I'm moving from sort of saving lives in the ICU and that kind of thing to, well, how do I learn all these tools and actually see patients on a daily basis? And again, it seemed very, very strange to me that we're using a process of trial and error when we're examining our patients. And so I actually came up with the initial both idea and then the initial prototype examination system of taking images directly from the patient encounter, from the instruments that we use to examine the patient, and then file them, stream them wirelessly to basically remote screens initially for teaching purposes. So I did that, but then I put it aside again, because mostly I had this idea that, well, of course someone smarter than me and better connected surely must have already made this. And it's interesting, how much we can have this sense of a, that kind of, what do they call it, imposter syndrome. You're sort of sitting in there and like, surely somebody must have already done this. And then I sort of set that aside for years. And then prior to coming to the University of Virginia, I actually was funded to go around the world for a year, to go to 8 different countries, practice, teach, do a lot of eye surgery, and see patients in 8 different countries around the world, where encountered, unfortunately, just really being faced with the burden of global eye disease on a daily basis. And I noticed that one of my major things that I ended up being able to contribute was teaching regarding the back of the eye, diagnosis and treatment of the back of the eye. But the tools really didn't exist to capture the imaging from the back of the eye while the doctors are doing the examination. And so that sort of led me to come back in my own head to that initial kernel of an idea, but maintaining that idea of what are the fundamental problems that exist within, in my area it was within ophthalmology, within eye care, and then remembering that. Now I would kind of go back, so that beginning of mindset, that's good. That's in terms of coming up with kind of the good ideas, right, the big ideas. Well, in an academic environment, that's really plentiful. And I think that's one of the really great things now, is that, this sort of idea of promoting entrepreneurship. I think there's this really established idea of coming up with big ideas and trying to solve them now. I've been very impressed with UVA in that regard. That said, though, the power of experience and, by the same token, data is really important. This is not really a system I would have come up with, or definitely decide to put my effort and time into as a young man, but rather as a practicing ophthalmologist. At this point, there's 10 years of training and clinical practice in 8 different countries that sort of led me to today to say that actually this idea that I came up with a long time ago can solve a lot of real world problems for a lot of clinical practices as well as patients. There's a lot of resources that are available for you to sort of take this idea of verifying your idea and with real world practice, just to make sure that you're actually solving an actual problem for customers, for patients, for that sort of thing. The iLab, the NIH and NSF iCore, these are all options that are available to you. And then Alex likes to promote, there's a little PDF pamphlet, you can find it online, called Talking to Humans. And I'll be, at the end of my slide deck, I'll sort of throw up a couple of different things that you can search for that'll help you in sort of doing this. But I think it's really, really important to take that real world data to ground your big ideas. And then also just thinking, is there a business model here? And that's something that you may not get right, you probably won't get right initially, and I certainly didn't. That's something that I think you'll just end up iterating and changing over the course of time. But you always want to go back to what's really happening in the real world. And I think Kevin did an amazing job with that. And then along with the other presenters today of making sure that that's communicated to you. The other thing that's talked about a lot in the iLab is this concept of the bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, that kind of thing. What is it? And I think I think even Payam, some of the other people sort of talked about this. I know Kevin did. That what is it that sets you apart in terms of your unique either ability or knowledge base in a specific area? So for me, I was fortunate to sort of have more of a liberal arts background. So maybe that, I don't know, maybe that sort of led me to sort of be more responsive to out-of-the-box thinking in my own training and my practice. But I think the major thing for me was that I am designing a product for myself and for my colleagues. And I think that's very, very important. In a way, I'm my own harshest critic. I'm not going to release a product if I don't think it has clinical utility for my patients or if it's going to slow down myself or my colleagues. So that's my comparative advantage. And I think for many of us, we'll end up finding our own, but I think that's important to think about. Other things, So in terms of the actual route that people take, so going about it as a faculty member, the first thing that I would like to stress is that, so again, we built this system, we have filed the initial IP, we're gearing up towards actually testing it in doctors' practices. All of this was possible at UVA. And this is not something, I heard it a couple of times in other people's talks, that this idea that I didn't think about being an entrepreneur, or some people actually initially had the idea. I absolutely did not think I was going to be an entrepreneur. So I set out to do the same thing I do on a daily, weekly basis, which is to take care of patients, to teach, and to combat the global burden of eye disease. I didn't think that I would end up setting out special time for myself to start up a company and do this, but it turned out that that's what I ended up doing. Now, I needed a lot of help to get me there, and particularly when you're going about that inside of an institution, there's this idea of not just entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship. And so that's sort of an entrepreneurial mindset within a larger institution. There are a lot of those people here at UVA. So obvious examples, so Alex Zarita and then Liz Pyle over at Works in Progress and other institutions here at UVA, they really are good entrepreneurs at linking you to other resources and people. The iLab at UVA, I would not be here without them. So David Tuvey and Jason Brewster at the iLab and the other mentors that we've met through there have been very, very helpful in terms of that linking. And then, in terms of actually sort of crossing the T's and dotting the I's and that sort of thing, so licensing and venture group, so Michael Stradiff has been very, very helpful in terms of, what is it that I actually have to do in order to accomplish this goal here at UVA as a full-time faculty member. And you can do it too, just make sure you kind of talk to the right people ahead of time. And then having an institutional champion, I think, is really important to actually achieve that goal. I would also not be able to do this without the support of my chairman, Peter Netland, who has, allowed me to finish my glaucoma fellowship 3 years ago, about almost a month early, after I'd saved my vacation time, to then participate in the UVA iLab and then go on to recruit a team and start Scanoptix over the following year. And then just understanding that having those champions, I think, is important because when you're working within an institutional framework, not everybody will get it. That's the thing, is most people are going to sign up to, particularly, within an academic environment or a medicine environment or a scientific research environment. Sometimes entrepreneurial mindset might be frowned upon, and I think that was brought up in some of the other talks. That is true, so finding a champion, I think, is important to sort of get you through those things. All right, the other thing is breaking out of your silo. So there's an Indian expression called being a frog in a well. And the idea is that sort of a frog sitting at the bottom of a well is stuck in a silo, and their entire view of the entire world is just simply the sky, the little patch of sky that they see above them, and they think that that's the whole world. We in healthcare, just as a bit of self-criticism, I think we're some of the worst at this. So it's very, very, very easy to really, really become hyper specialized in your view of everything in terms of our clinic and our OR. And I think it's so useful. One of the most worthwhile things for me was to find out that, just even a walk down the street from the hospital center, there's resources available where they're building, Mars lander type vehicles and in cars. These sorts of resources available to us. I would have never discovered these things if it weren't for getting out of my clinic at least part of the week and then participate in something like the iLab, where I was able to meet my counterparts, my peer mentors or senior mentors or betters in other parts of the university and in the community in Charlottesville and elsewhere. And again, just finding those peer mentors. I think Alex talked about this. Modeling entrepreneurship, I think, is really important, just to see that it's important, that it's possible. And because, again, this is certainly for me not something that I ever thought that I was going to do in medical school. And then I think that this is something that every one of the presenters has talked about, making lemonade out of lemons. And we've had our share. So, again, I think, Alex wanted me to come up with a story where things didn't go right, and I think we've certainly had several, but I think the thing that stands out for me was originally, the whole point of the entire imaging system for me had to do with international medical education. And basically my system enables any examination instrument used by any eye doctor, optometrist or ophthalmologist, to turn into a real-time telemedicine imaging system. And so I had actually applied for a NIH grant, rather substantial NIH grant, and established a legal relationship between UVA, our clinical department in ophthalmology, the Department of Infectious Diseases, as well as an eye hospital in Uganda that one of my mentors had a clinical teaching relationship with. And we went through a lot of effort to try to set up that whole relationship, and then applied for this pretty substantial undertaking to basically make a telemedicine imaging system between our two countries to try to improve their residency program and their teaching and how to actually monitor and treat eye disease, particularly retinal eye disorders. And then we didn't get the grant. And the grant was actually going to support iteration of our prototyping internationally, to basically field test our initial prototypes in Uganda. But actually that experience led me to go back and actually do a lot of interviews with eye doctors here. And then in the meantime, sort of while we're sort of figuring out what to do next, to really test our device with doctors here. And that led to an entire series of extremely surprising observations where we discovered that there's a huge amount of need for in multiple settings in terms of private practice, optometry, as well as ophthalmology, in a variety of different practice settings here in the US that I never really thought of before. And then that was sort of going to be a long-term kind of thing. And then, and also that idea that Kevin put in his slide that making products is really hard. And I think we really underestimated that in the beginning. I mean, we've had to solve about 12 different technical challenges to make the process of capturing what doctors see when they're examining patients utterly seamless. We don't even have a screen in our current system. So we really have to rely on our technology to make it as seamless as possible. So I think it's been very, very important for us to get those lessons that we have to really get the product right first before we start putting it into other people's hands. And also that there really is a need here in the US. And we wouldn't have understood that if we hadn't kind of had that setback. And then I think finally I just wanted to talk about that, I think, other people have also mentioned this, that teams really do matter. I think there's this sort of myth of the, one-person company or something like this, and I have no illusions. So I was, again, taught as an eye doctor and ophthalmologist with background in public health, international public health. And again, this is something that was really surprising to me that I ended up engaging in. But my long-term vision is actually eventually to take a step back and to be more in an R&D and medical director role. And I think one of the greatest lessons from going through something like the UVA Eye Lab is that ultimately that other people will have to pass on this journey themselves. So, finding the right people to work with, I think it's really, really, really important. There's a lot of matchmaking resources here at UVA and at Darden. So Alex and Liz are really good at this. David Chen with the Coulter Institute. There's these online tools like Bright Crowd, I think is what they call themselves now. Sort of a matchmaking service for entrepreneurs. I think it's important to find your counterparts when you're trying to start a company. So just recognizing your own limits, I think that's kind of a lesson that I learned myself as well. And finding those contributors to what is the real problem that you're trying to solve, and then who are the different people at different stages in your journey that you're going to need, because that is also going to be an evolving thing. And I would say that UVA Seed Fund has been extremely helpful when it comes to that, determining, okay, at this stage, what are you going to need, when you're doing your beta testing versus when you end up actually then shipping a product, what are you going to need at that point? And I think that's an important lesson to learn. And then I wanted to include this to say that, I'm a real person, and this is my 4-month-old son, and that some days I do feel like this. And so sometimes you don't always get it right. And in my clinical practice, I have a busy glaucoma practice. I specialize in the minimally invasive treatment of glaucoma. international ophthalmology. I'm helping run the glaucoma fellowship at UVA, as well as my research, plus Scanoptix, and then a 4-month-old son and my wife, and our 80-year-old house. And so I think momentum, I think that was something brought up before, that sometimes is the hardest thing to sustain when you're doing this as a full-time faculty member. What I would say that's really helped me has been setting aside, and that's something I was able to negotiate, was to really set aside time to work on the company. And so every week I set aside time to do this, and then in terms of forming that mentorship network, so Seed Fund has really been helpful in that, in just feeling like you're continuing to move forward and you're moving that needle forward constantly every week. Otherwise, it's very easy to get overwhelmed between all the different directions that somebody who's a faculty member is going to get pulled in. But then on good days, I think it's really rewarding. This is my son Ravi, and this is my wife Carly, who's here. And I just really wanted to say that my first mentor was really Carly. So when I came here 3 years ago after doing my international fellowship overseas with an idea that I would just be in Charlottesville for 1 year, do my glaucoma fellowship, and then probably get back overseas. And I met Carly about 2 weeks later, and then here I am now. And actually, it was Carly that I think mostly got tired of hearing me whine about some of my frustrations with the way medicine is practiced in the US. And she's the one that actually told me about the iLab. So she had known about the iLab through Shark Mountain Coffee's entrepreneurial journey. And then she said, she actually is the one that sat me down, connected the dots between my idea of the connected medical exam and the augmented examination of patients, and then some of my frustrations with practicing medicine in the US, as well as the remarkable resources that are available over at UVA at the iLab, available to faculty and students as well as community members. And so she helped me actually file my application and write that. And in the middle of a patient day, one of my mentors gave me permission to go do my pitch, and then I went back to seeing patients and actually to OR later that evening. But then I got in, and then that sort of brought me to today. So I took some concrete steps with a lot of help to help me realize my journey. That's an ongoing journey, and so we don't have a crystal ball, but that's something that is possible for all of you. And with the resources that are available, like with Alex, with the UVA Seed Fund, with Works in Progress, etc., we're hoping to move our clinical exams back from this, again, to this with a lot of help. So thanks, Alex.